Redditors who listen to police scanners, what's the craziest thing you've ever heard? When we had the Waldo Canyon fires here in Colorado, a buddy of mine sent me a link to a scanner broadcast keyed in on the firefighters. They entered a house that was about to go up in flames and found a woman dead in a bathtub, and then left because the house was about to go up. It was really straightforward, like yep, lady's dead, let's go. What a hellish situation to be that calm in. Bad coincidence or best murder ever. Once heard officers tracking down a 1999 Prius. As you may know, the Prius wasn't around back then. They searched for close to an hour for this thing before dispatch said, wait, 1999 Privia. At least he was close. Would have been hilarious if it turned out to be an F-150 or something. Not crazy perhaps, just funny. Constable to dispatcher, there's a pothole here, filled with muddy water. I don't know if we should get someone down here to cover it up. Dispatcher, how deep is it? Constable, I don't know. It's impossible to see and I don't really have anything to measure with. Dispatcher, you do have boots on, don't you? Constable, well, yeah. 2 minutes of silence. Constable, it's deep. Not my story but my dad's. When he was younger he listened to the cops getting a warning about a car accident and that there was a dead person. Some time later he hears another warning. The dead person is alive. So it begins. I worked in the same building as law enforcement and 911, so often overheard the crazy, most memorable, cop, I'm out in, far edge of rural county, and I've got a huge bird running loose. 911, what do you mean huge bird? Cop, like an ostrich. 911, might be an emu. Cop, good, I can spell emu. End of story. We have a farmer who started raising emus, one of which kept escaping. Other animal related. Houdini is out. Cattle farm in another part of the county had a bull that regularly gets out and goes to the highway to watch the cars go by. He never goes into traffic, just stands there. He will walk back to his enclosure if you order him to. He's Houdini because there's never a breach in the fence. The gate's always closed. No idea how he gets out. I also once had a cow named Houdini. I swear I watched her just teleport through a closed gate one time. She didn't just stand there though. She ran far. Listening to the scanners in Chicago, sometime around 2005, this cop gets on the radio and says he's found an arm. Like, just the arm of someone in the street. He was pretty casual about it. Clarified by saying he wasn't a doctor, and he'd need one to confirm, but he was pretty sure it was a human arm. 3 teenagers were operating a golf cart up and down a long driveway when the driver went out into the 2-lane highway to make a U-turn and was hit by a speeding car, also full of teenagers. 2 were killed at the scene and a third was disabled for life. It was one of the most tragic accidents the town had ever seen and involved well-known families. I could hear the emotion and panic in a couple of the cops' voices. This isn't quite what you were looking for, because I was inside the police station itself, talking to some officers, when the police radio went off. So I was listening to police radio, but not via a scanner, but live. Anyway, they'd found a body floating in a pond. 2 officers went off to investigate. A few days later the story came out. A local company made bread. For more than a decade they'd been allowing local drivers, who had their own vans, to deliver the bread to different areas or runs. The drivers added a surcharge for bread delivered, so the price was a little higher than the local shop, but you got your bread delivered every day. That's how they made money even though they were offering the company a free service. Then one day the company decided they were going to purchase their own vans and train their own drivers and deliver their own bread. When this happened there was a near riot. A huge meeting was called to calm down a mob of angry drivers. Some drivers had been doing this for more than a decade. Some had paid money to buy a bread van so they could make deliveries. Some of the drivers were complaining they'd bought their runs, areas where they delivered bread, from other drivers who had left, and that the company had to compensate them. The company spokesman said that they had not received any money from drivers, had not sold the runs and nobody was going to be receiving any compensation. A couple of days later his body was found in the pond. I never heard if they found the murderers. Seems pretty sad. When I was doing EMT training, I used to listen to the scanner all the time on my commute to my regular job, you know, to sort of get used to the radio traffic. So one day I stopped at a branch of my bank on the way to work to deposit a check or something. There was quite a line of people. I complete my business, get in the truck, and head off to work. Not even 1 minute after I pulled out on the road, the police channel came through with a robbery alarm. At the bank I had just left, the robber had to have been in line right behind me. Not too long ago a couple buddies and me were smoking on the front porch listening to a high-speed chase. It was a pretty gnarly one. No gunfire, but the dude didn't give up easy and hit a lot of crap. It was happening right on our side of town, so we were hearing the actual chase as well as the radio. We'd hear a loud bang and then they'd explain what he'd just run into. Here I was hoping at one point they would fly past your house. Listening to storm chasers during a tornado outbreak one night. The channel was essentially storm spotters relaying information for a few hours and slowly transitioning into search and rescue. Things like, Watcher 3, I checked, address, and everyone's accounted for, minor structural damage. Watcher 2 checking, address 2, looks like they have structural damage. They're meeting me in the driveway, all okay. Just stuff like that. It's a rural area and everyone that could was out helping. Then this came across. Watcher 4, I'm checking, address, other watcher, that's your in-laws? Watcher 4, yes, silence for a minute, structure's gone, checking for residents, silence then suddenly but calmly, Watcher 4 at, address, requesting fire and ambulance, other watcher's real name I assume, could you call my wife, please, just call, wife's name, and have her get in the truck and get up here as fast as possible. God, that is so awful. I used to work in San Bernardino and was at work on the 2nd of December 2015. One of my co-workers was talking about a shooting that was still going on a couple of miles away. I didn't think anything of it. After all, it is San Bernardino we're talking about here. Until we received an order to evacuate the store and go on lockdown until we got the all clear from the police. I immediately downloaded a police scanner app on my phone and started listening to what was going on. It was terrifying to hear the police calling out intersections that were closer and closer to the store where I worked. Then it became a nightmare when I heard that the cops were led to my neighborhood. It turns out the terrorists were some of my neighbors. They lived maybe 2 blocks away. I used to work in news and this was probably one of the better conversations I heard. Listening during the evening and this came on. Dispatcher, just had a call that a pizza delivery driver was robbed before dropping off the order. Officer, okay. Do you have a description? Dispatcher, well, the offender will have 7 large white pizza boxes and 2 liters of pop. Officer, laughs. The dogs are going to have fun with this one. Release the hounds. Was at a buddy's place smoking some herb. When I left, there was a police officer across the street searching around with a flashlight. Asked how long I was at the house I just left and if I lived there. Told him I was there 10 minutes and I didn't live there. He let me go. I left and called my buddy to let him know there were cops outside. I went home and turned on the police scanner and listened for about 2 hours. Suddenly, I hear them asking for background checks on people and I hear my buddy's name pop up. They found paraphernalia and a bunch of weed. Had no idea how they found out. Later, I go over to the house and his roommates tell me another person who was staying at the house was involved in a hit and run and fled the scene because he was drunk as heck and went to hide in the house. The person he hit followed him to the house and called the cops. Oof, that's an awful friend right there. Watching TV one night I see a police cruiser driving slowly down my cul-de-sac street, sweeping his searchlight over and between the houses. I flip on my radio and the cruiser is supporting a foot pursuit of a suspect by a canine unit. The pursuit goes right through my backyard. I hear the canine officer, out of breath, reporting his status on the radio and then I hear the dog bark on the radio as I simultaneously hear the bark in my yard. They caught the suspect shortly afterwards, but it was a strange evening. The phrase canine officer makes me picture the dog itself with a radio. Car 42. You remember that domestic violence call you did an hour ago where the husband attacked his wife? Yes. Well, better go back, because now the wife is attacking the husband. It's very common to go to the same house multiple times a night like this. Source: police dispatcher. I'm the other half of the scanner. Disclaimer of this being decades ago. Was sat smoking weed with friends and listening to the police on a scanner. One of the friends had to go home and set off walking. 30 minutes later heard the police busting him for weed. Oh, how I laughed. Please don't let this distract you from the fact that in the criminal justice system, sexually based offenses are considered especially heinous. In New York City, the dedicated detectives who investigate these vicious felonies are members of an elite squad known as the Special Victims Unit. These are their stories. Dun dun. In high school I was in an Explorer Scout post sponsored by a couple of suburban police departments. I ended up getting to know a lot of the cops. Kind of strange for a high school kid. One of the communities had a string of burglaries that had not yet been solved. The PD had one detective who would respond to each site and gather evidence. I heard a call go out one night on my scanner of another break-in, but it was in progress and they caught the guy. Then I heard the police chief respond to the site, but no detective. The next morning I heard on the media that the burglar admitted he was working with the detective, who would identify houses where the owners were on vacation, take care of any evidence, and split the profits. It was an interesting experience. The best thing those cops did for me was talk me out of going to law school and becoming a lawyer. The daughter of the mayor was driving erratically with multiple illegal guns in the car. The cops were tripping over themselves on the radio trying to understand exactly what needs to be done here since they haven't been able to get in touch with the mayor. Very entertaining. My mom used to stay up late in Memphis in the 90s listening to the scanner. Some of the crazy things she would hear made it seem like we lived in a movie. The most interesting were police pursuits. Occasionally she would wake us up laughing because of the silly mistakes that the police would make in these pursuits. I can't remember specifics, but it's like the guy driving through wet cement type stuff. The rough parts of Memphis always has something going down. Lived in a small town, so not much interesting would come over the radio. But once there was an escaped llama on the loose that the cops were trying to find. That was definitely a highlight. There was a kangaroo on the loose in Port St. Lucie, Florida in 2004 or 5, after Hurricane Francis or Jean. They eventually found the owner, Rob Van Winkle, better known as Vanilla Ice. Yesterday one of my city's cops got called in on a domestic violence call and got his butt beat by a woman with a strap-on. Good luck living that one down. This happened in January. We were vacationing in the Grand Canyon. We took out break from all the hiking and returned to our cabin for a rest. If anyone has been to the canyon, they will say how quiet and peaceful it is out there. When you hear loud sirens whiz by, it quickly prompts your attention because it contrasts the silence so abruptly. We listened to the police scanner and heard clear as day no signs of life. Notify the coroner. We assumed someone fell but never received confirmation. But we were told that falls over the canyon are more common than you think. And judging by the large number of people we saw carelessly jumping around the edges, taking selfies and such, I believe it. When we were there 20 years ago I asked the park ranger if they had many accidents. He told me a father died jumping from one rock ledge to another to scare his daughters. The ledge broke. He died. I stayed up all night as Boston PD started closing in on the marathon bombers. I didn't really think anything would happen and it was really quiet. Then, suddenly a hard Bostonian accent came over the channel. All units, there are reports of gunfire at MIT. Can anyone confirm? Please advise. Silence. Sean Collier was shot in his cruiser at point blank range on MIT's notoriously safe campus. It was at that moment you could feel this very weird tension. Something about that silence said all this had to be related somehow. The next morning I watched the sunrise completely beside myself as to what I had just heard all night on the scanners. I remember the odd sense of surrealism that I felt as I listened to Watertown police screaming for backup as they got bombs thrown at them during a gunfight at point blank range and all-out warfare unfolding in the middle of a quiet neighborhood. I also remember the moment BPD in the surrounding towns went completely radio silent, wondering where all the police went. No chatter, no reports, nothing. I walked up to my living room window, and it was just then that it occurred to me, in seeing nothing but SWAT and trucks that look more like tanks than anything. They were hunting. I missed the call that came in but heard the chaos unravel as the entire Boston area got word that the last remaining bomber was in some dude's boat. Then, one cool calm collect voice came over and said, SWAT and HRT has it, guys. Please keep all traffic off of all channels until we come back. I like to think it was that same guy who was the one with his laser in between the eyes of the last bomber before he was arrested. I remember during the last moments of the hunt, one of the cops making a union-related comment and was told to get off the frequency. There was a huge wildfire that had some sparks ignite the fruit crates for a fruit packing shed in the middle of town. You could see the fire glow from miles away. It was the week before the 4th of July, and I was with my girlfriend listening to the scanner. It's late, maybe 1 AM. Suddenly the fire chatter changes to police chatter. There was a hit and run on the main Ave. A woman with dark hair in a dark color small sedan had rear-ended another car that was stopped at a stoplight, then sped off. A witness had gotten a license plate number. The location was right next to the big packing shed fire, so they were pretty sure they were distracted by the fire. There was nothing more said about it. My girlfriend and I eventually fell asleep. The following morning I wake up to multiple missed calls from a couple numbers I didn't recognize, plus one from my landlord. I listen to a voicemail and it's a detective. He needs to talk to me ASAP and threatens obstruction of justice charges if I don't. I call him back. He thought I was at home in my apartment, ignore his knocking. I explain I was at my girlfriend's house and wasn't home at all the night before in the morning. My roommate had been the hit and run driver. She was drunk. They traced the license plate and got our address. Her car was sitting in the driveway right in front of our apartment, all crunched in on the front. It was amazing it still drove. The detective didn't need my help anymore. He got all the evidence he needed from the car in the driveway. She was charged with felony hit and run. I believe she skipped out on the prosecution. She moved out before the next weekend and stiffed me on the rent. That went from 0-100 fast. Not crazy, but funny. Cop 1, we had a mom call in, injured kid. Cop 2, what happened? Is the kid okay? Cop 1, just a bee sting. Kid's fine. Nebraska. Years ago I heard a funny interchange between a cop and his dispatcher when they ran someone's plate. The cop kept using the Spanish pronunciation of Jesus, and the dispatcher would argue with the cop. It's Jesus. It says Jesus right here. One more. For those who aren't aware, police and other public safety vehicles typically have at least 2 hand mics. One for the mobile radio that the officers use to talk with dispatch, and another which is connected to their siren so they can use it as a loudspeaker if need be. Sometimes they get the two mixed up in the heat of the moment, as was evidenced by the comms I heard from a police agency that shall remain nameless, where after a pursuit suspect bailed on foot, an officer transmitted over the dispatch channel, "Stop right there, you little sucker." Oh god, I wonder how often that happens. When I was a kid, 70s 80s, my family often drove to Memphis from Dallas to spend Thanksgiving and Christmas holidays with my grandparents from both sides. My great-grandfather always had a police scanner running in the kitchen. One Thanksgiving morning, a call came across the scanner reporting that a man broke into a home and held the family at gunpoint while he stole their turkey and dressing. I recall my dad saying, "That's Memphis for ya." I listened to the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department searching for Chris Dorner in Big Bear and the ultimate standoff where the flashbang set the house on fire. I also listened to the pursuit of the Boston bombers from just after the MIT shooting, when they were recognized at a gas station convenience store. I think they'd carjacked a guy, until after they apprehended the guy hiding in a boat. I recall a Redditor had a stray bullet come through the wall of his house and he posted a pic of where it went through his desk chair. Driving through Iowa late at night and the interstate was closed. My scanner app said a guy stepped in front of a semi. Further listening told me Waterloo is a pretty rough town with a crack problem. The amount of public nudity that was on display in my small, well-to-do, suburban hamlet is beyond description. Long Islanders are all apparently one bad day away from stripping it all off, screaming, and crapping in the middle of the street like a bunch of monkeys. We know a lot of folks in EMS and have a scanner tuned to their channels. In our city the police don't like dealing with psychs, so it's always EMS problem. This leads to a lot of amusing comments on the radio. My favorite was, "That's a negative. It seems the police have decided to grace us with their presence, but we heard tons. Looks like the police took a wrong turn and accidentally ended up on scene," etc. One day there was a jumper, and it turned out sadly the guy made the leap and died. The comment on this made me burst out laughing. Horrible, I know. Yes, coroner inbound. The patient has assumed room temperature. Patient is deceased? Correct. He will not be down for breakfast, mum. Just heard this about 15 minutes ago. A. John is coming your direction now. B. Tall John. Or the one who looks like a retard. A. Cackling tall. But if you saw him trying to open the dang door, you'd say he looks retarded. Faint sounds of John laughing in background. Not crazy but funny. A call comes over for a dead cat in the road. One cop meows. Second cop meow. Who said that? Third, I want to know meow. Dispatcher meow. Who can take the call? Sergeant. You need to stop this meow. I don't remember all of it, but for 10 minutes this went on, and this was last night. Super Troopers 2 viral marketing is getting crazy. My fiancée is an avid scanner listener. I haven't caught the bug quite yet, but I'm sure I will. Recently, we stayed with friends in a really crappy area, and the scanner was all over the place. The cops were really sarcastic. 2. Our friend's house is on the same street as the local high school. One night, we were out for a smoke. No smoking inside. It was rough, and we heard what sounded like .22 LR shots. Common throwaway handguns in the hood. We saw the green lights from the high school's rent-a-cop van turn orange, which we ascertained was them stopping to investigate. Went inside and turned on the scanner. A cop responded and found a bunch of empty shells. Apparently it was just a fight that got out of hand. Nobody was shot, but for the rest of the month we were there, we didn't see the security van at the school anymore. We guess they quit. Another good one was a cop who responded to a disturbance in an apartment building. He had to go to like the 10th floor. No elevator. He walked all the way up the stairs, and is audibly catching his breath when he radioed back in asking what apartment it was. Dispatch says they called back and cancelled the call. Cop goes, ugh, fantastic in the most deadpan voice ever. The cops would regularly get calls from areas bordering the next city over, and if they didn't feel like dealing with it, they'd say, "Welp, I'll let Cleveland know this one is theirs." In the town we used to live in, I had the scanner on one day and heard a report of a hot air balloon crash. The town had a balloon festival, and someone done fricked up. Big storm incoming. Residents of area advised to evacuate. 1130 am middle of crap storm. Trees are falling. Water is rising. Power is out. Evac area is not drivable. Dispatcher, address an evac zone. Called in. The water is up to her steps and now she would like to evacuate. Random broadcaster. HA. Listened for another half hour as all heck is breaking loose all around. I don't think the caller got to go to a hotel that night. My mom listens to them all the time. We live a few blocks from each other. A few years ago I look out my window and see tons of police cars with their lights on blocking the streets. I asked my mom to listen to the scanners. She started texting me what she was hearing. A man had shot his wife 2 houses down from us. He shot her and was on the run before her body was discovered by their children. I immediately locked all my doors and armed myself and basically just sat waiting. He ended up being caught a few blocks away in someone's driveway. It was a pretty intense experience. My aunt has a police scanner. She has it tuned to the local police and fire departments, as well as the prison that her friend works at. Here are some of the things that she hears. Most police calls are either pullovers or burglar alarms that go off, usually false alarms. A lot of people trying to rob Walmart. Occasionally a 50 or 60 something year old will go into cardiac arrest. Car accidents. Around Thanksgiving and Christmas, there tends to be a lot more house fires, although we don't always hear those because we're busy with our own celebrations. There is a chemical agent, or, as most people refer to it, gas, within a system that runs through the prison. Basically, if a fight breaks out, the system is set off and this really fine powder rains down and it's supposed to be an irritant that subdues everybody. When that thing goes off, it leaves a mess in the prison for a week and is a major pain to clean up. Every day during meals, there is a guy that has to carry the key that activates it to and from the mess hall. When he does this, a call goes out on the radio. Mess hall gas is on the move. For some reason, My aunt and I find this amusing and often wait around by the scanner to listen for it. The prison's radio frequency lets out a tiny burst of static every few seconds. We don't know why. Some prisons use that burst of static as a sort of "I'm still operating" indicator that wouldn't be obvious if the central control room was taken over. This isn't really crazy, but I'm regularly amazed at the number of parents who call the police on their own adolescent children. I've heard several moose won't go back in the woods calls that usually led to some entertaining mayhem. One of my favorite things to catch on the scanner for the local fire department is the last alarm. Whenever a guy retires, as his last shift comes to a close, the dispatch will key up the radio and let everyone know that they're gonna sound off his last alarm. Then they ring the tone system wide, call for his unit to stand down, and thank him for his service over the radio. I keep using him. As far as I know, the local FD hasn't had a female firefighter retire yet. That's better than the end of watch calls that I've heard. Those hurt to hear. My neighbor had a police scanner that he would listen to while he was sitting on his porch. When I was about 8, I was playing outside and heard a couple loud pops from the next block over. Didn't think anything of it. About 5 minutes later I heard on his police scanner about a shots fired domestic situation. Within minutes the whole next block was swarmed with cops. The loud pops I heard, that was the husband killing his wife, and then himself. Crap, that's terrible. My boyfriend and I used to live in a part of town where it wasn't uncommon for us to play gunshots or fireworks. Rent was cheap. It was usually fine. Whatever. Anyways, one night we were sitting at home watching TV when we definitely heard a gunshot. It sounded close by, so we turned the TV down a bit and listened to figure what was going on. Almost immediately we started hearing tons of sirens screaming down the road, and muffled voices on megaphones, like crap was going down by us. So we hop on the police scanner and start listening to the conversations, and were able to pick up that a man had been trying to break into an apartment. Police were called, and said man had shot a cop while he was fleeing the scene and they now were trying to find him. Then they said the address of the apartment in question, and of course it's the complex directly across the street from ours. The shooter at this point is at like a 4-star wanted level, so there's helicopters with searchlights, officers getting on roofs, you name it. By this point we're hunkered down in our bedroom with the couch pushed up against the sliding door balcony in the front room. We couldn't put anything against the front door because our roommate hadn't yet come home from work. The helicopters are hovering over our complex, and we're able to deduce from the scanner that the suspect's potentially hiding somewhere in one of our buildings. They've shut our street down, and are sending in officers to the buildings to find the guy. Hours go by, and we eventually fall asleep with no word as to if they've caught the guy or not. The next morning we check on the news and see that they still haven't found the guy, and our street is still shut down while they search apartments. They found him a few hours later hiding back in the apartments across the street. We were pretty glad to move a month later. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.